Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 2017 conversation, Black Americans for a Better Future, Continuing to Dream. This evening, we'll have a discussion with two candidates running for Lieutenant Governor of the state of Virginia, Jill Vogel and Glenn Davis, and we would ask the two candidates to please take the stage. Good evening, candidates, and welcome this evening. We're going to start the evening by allowing each candidate to first deliver an opening monologue, and then we'll have a series of questions and answers, and then we'll hear from some of the audience, maybe some questions that they have, and then we'll allow you to close with your closing statements. So we will say ladies first, and Ms. Vogel, please.
Well, thank you. Is that better? Oh, how perfect. Thank you and good evening. And thank you very, very much to our hosts for putting together this conversation. It is wonderful for us to have an opportunity to be together and be with you and hopefully engage a community that desperately needs to be engaged on issues that are really important in this race in 2017. I'm very eager to hear from folks in the audience and excited to be here with Delegate Davis. I'm Jill Vogel, running for Lieutenant Governor. I was born and raised in Virginia in the Shenandoah Valley. I am a mom. I'm happy to say that my 5-year-old is here in the audience. I am an ethics attorney, and I started a practice with just myself, and I'm proud that I've grown that practice now into all 50 states, and I'm the managing partner in a firm that does work representing charities, nonprofits, trade associations. And something I'm proud that our firm did is when the IRS was targeting conservative groups around the country, we defended them. Because among the things that are really important is your First Amendment speech right and your ability to engage. And again, that's what this discussion tonight is about, is encouraging people to engage. And again, I am so grateful for those who have organized this. Many, many people are not aware that we have an important election in 2017. And in fact, in just 34 days, we have an important primary election on June the 13th. And I know Delegate Davis and I are working hard to encourage people to participate. So getting back to my little background for those who don't know much about me, I mentioned I'm an ethics lawyer. I'm also a state senator. I've been in the state senate for now almost 10 years. And among the things that I have worked hard to champion are the things that I think that matter to real Virginians and their livelihood, their education, their freedom. And those are things like tax reform and regulatory reform and choice in education and opportunity, access to higher education, making education more affordable. Among the things that have actually helped prepare me for that time in the legislature was, for a short time, I served as Deputy General Counsel at the Department of Energy. And as a young lawyer, that was an extraordinary experience because I was able to be in charge not just of some ethics transition in the Bush administration, but also I was in charge of a very significant regulatory review. And that helped me understand, among many things, the harm the government can do. Because I came in at the tail end of the previous administration's effort to ram through a bunch of really job-killing regulations. And that was really important, and it's really helped inform many of the things that I've done during my years in the legislature. But I fought for women's health. I fought for issues affecting children with autism. I fought for people who need access to things like CBD oil. I fought for industrial hemp. I fought for agriculture. So there's so many issues that we in the legislature have worked hard to address that I have made priorities of mine. They are issues that transform Virginia in terms of the efforts that we make, and I hope that these will be some of the core things we'll talk about in this discussion tonight. So thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, good evening, and I want to thank everyone for holding this event as well, for us to have this dialogue. A little bit about myself. As mentioned, my name is Glenn Davis. I'm honored that I've been a state delegate for the last 4 years representing the middle of Virginia Beach. Prior to that, I was on the Virginia Beach City Council for 5 years and also had the honor back in the mid-90s to be Bob McDonnell's legislative aide. I got my start really going after that American dream. You see, my great-grandfather came to this country from Italy in the early 1900s with nothing in his pocket and spoke broken English, but he had a trade. He knew how to grind blades and shears on a big grinding wheel. And my grandfather, well, he dropped out of school in the 6th grade to go work for his father until World War II, went off to Germany, fought for our nation and came back, and ran Escote's Beauty and Barber Supply in downtown Norfolk until he retired in the 70s. And I grew up sitting on a stool in his business, watching him and my uncles grind blades and shears in those old oyster clippers, and my mom tended to the clients. And that's where I first learned about the American dream. It didn't matter where you were born, it didn't matter who your parents were, how much money they had. All that mattered is, did you have the ability to sacrifice, and did you have the perseverance and the dedication to create something for yourself, your family, and that next generation? So when I lost my job 6 weeks before Christmas in 1999, and I had that choice to move back in with mom and dad or do I create my own business, I did the latter. And I started an IT company out of a one-bedroom apartment that 8 years later became one of the fastest growing IT companies in the US, according to Inc. magazine. And I did it because I understood the American dream. I understood it was all about just, do you have the ability to work hard to go after what you want in life? And that American dream, well, is starting to slip away. You see, we used to celebrate those that created opportunity, that took risks and went after that American dream, but more and more we're penalizing them. We're taking more from them to give more to those that think government entitlement is a career choice. And those that find themselves needing that handout and on what we consider an entitlement program, we don't help them get off that program. We keep those programs hostage. We never actually help them get back on their feet fully again and reach their full potential. And that's wrong. And that's why I'm running for Lieutenant Governor. You see, we used to be the best state in the nation for business and job growth, and that's just not a big statement. That means that we have opportunities for everyone to go out and create a business or to reach their true potential. But that's fallen aside. You see, I support school choice. I actually helped start a charter school in Virginia Beach, and it's gotten national awards. I've been that small business person that at some points never thought I was going to be able to make ends meet. I was the person that didn't know how I was going to get to that next paycheck, but we did. And my goal as Lieutenant Governor is to bring innovation and opportunity all across the Commonwealth for all Virginians to reach their full potential. And those that find themselves in a tough place in life, to help them get out and reach their full potential for them and that next generation behind them as well. Thank you again for having us. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you, candidates, Senator Vogel and Delegate Davis. Thank you for those opening comments. Now we're going to hear a few words from our organizer, Mr. Raynard Jackson, and after Mr. Jackson makes a few comments, we'll begin a question and answer session with our two reporters that are here this evening. Mr. Jackson.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, Aaron. Aaron Monego is one of the top operatives here in Virginia on the Republican side. And yes, there are plenty of black Republicans, despite what you may or may not see in the media. But Senator Vogel and Delegate Davis, thank you so much for taking our time to come and share with us. A lot of times, Republicans are accused of not wanting to dialogue with the minority community, and I've had conversations with both of you all over the months and years, and I know that you two are firmly committed to creating a diverse party. So let me tell you all just a little bit about Black Americans for a Better Future. We are a 527 super PAC set up to get more blacks involved in the Republican Party, and we focus strictly on the black entrepreneur, and so we work in tandem with our counterparts in the Hispanic, Asian, American Indian communities throughout the country to help diversify the Republican Party. And so, of course, we as business owners, we have a vested interest in the tax climate, the business climate in Virginia especially. And one of the reasons when I moved up here years ago, I moved to Virginia and never lived in DC and Maryland because Virginia's always been one of the lowest tax states in the country. And hopefully whoever wins, you are gonna make sure it stays that way. And so thank you guys for coming out, and we look forward to having this conversation. And at this moment, I'm gonna bring up two reporters who have a pretty broad reach not only in the journalistic community, but in the black community, especially. Ken McClinton, he's the founder, chairman, CEO of the Exceptional Conservative Network, and he's going to interview you guys later on for his radio show, and that goes out all across the country. So I can't even talk now. Ken McClinton, thank you for agreeing to participate. And then our second journalist who will be dialoguing with our two candidates. And again, this is not going to be a debate. This is just going to be a conversation like we're sitting at the dinner table having a conversation. Is Freddie Washington. He's the editor of the National Newspaper Publishers Association as well as Black Press USA, which is a consortium. It's basically a black version of the AP. This goes out to all the black newspapers across the country, and they have a wire service. And so, again, he's going to interview you guys individually and do a profile of each of you guys to put up on the website. And then that's 3 black newspapers in Virginia, and they'll run there. So, Freddie Washington, welcome, and thank you for agreeing to participate. And I'm going to take, while Freddie's getting acclimated here, I'm going to use my prerogative as the chairman to ask the first question. Then I'm going to take my seat, and then I'm going to leave it to Ken, you and Freddie, just kind of have a conversation with Senator Vogel and Delegate Davis. And once you all have a little bit of time, we'll take some questions from the audience, and I may have a couple of other questions. So my first question is, can you all tell us what the role of the lieutenant governor is in Virginia? Because it varies by state as to what that role is and how much influence that position may or may not hold. So tell the audience a little bit about what is the role of the lieutenant governor in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Sure. Do you want either one to start, or?
You care who goes first?
Oh, sure. So constitutionally, the lieutenant governor presides over the Senate. The lieutenant governor votes in the case of ties in certain cases, and obviously he's there if the governor should not be able to continue. What's interesting and what I've always enjoyed about looking at this role is not what the Constitution says you can or cannot do, but what it kind of leaves that gray area. You see, I've spent a good chunk of my campaign for lieutenant governor looking at bringing economic opportunities to Virginia, innovation. I've been out to MIT to bring research and development back for coal initiatives in Southwest Virginia. I've been overseas on my own dime to bring back potentially manufacturing opportunities to Virginia. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm the guy that goes and finds challenges that are affecting communities and affecting different localities, and then I look for answers, and then I find ways to implement them. So as much as the Constitution says that you only have to truly sit there, maybe break ties and preside over the Senate and some other things, is what it allows you to do from economic opportunities to reach the American dream is why I'm running.
So the lieutenant governor, as he mentioned, you're president of the Senate. So you have a significant role in terms of providing leadership in the Senate, in your caucus. You can help drive much of the legislative agenda if you are willing to engage. You have the ability, obviously, to cast a tie-breaking vote. And in a Senate that is currently 21-19, that is actually can be a significant role that you play. But more than that, and this is really important, you don't just have to stop there. The lieutenant governor does not have to be a passive, mirror-potted plant that just stands there with a gavel and then goes home. Because there was a time when we had a Republican lieutenant governor who did more. And that is what I would love to see us return the lieutenant governor's office to represent more of what it did when Bill Bowling was lieutenant governor. And he really was deputized as sort of the chief economic growth and chief sort of jobs growth officer. And that's something that obviously we've talked so much about in this campaign. The number one issue really among real families, among people who are starting businesses, among those who are trying to decide what it is that's going to save Virginia, is helping small businesses, bringing economic development back to Virginia. For the first time, more people are leaving Virginia than coming to Virginia. And the thing that I would like to add to that, in addition to sort of being a chief, jobs officer, would be this, and that would be the Minister of Deregulation. because much of my political career and my legislative career has been focused on deregulation. And while I talk a lot about the tax climate, while people are leaving Virginia and going to North Carolina and to other states where the tax climate is friendlier, business taxes are getting lower, of course people are going to leave because they're rational economic actors. But here's the other thing, the thing that is the dirty secret that many people don't realize, and that is for young people, for people in economically depressed areas that don't have access to a lot of capital, the really big burden is regulation. That has more of a killing effect on your ability to be an entrepreneur and to succeed when the regulatory environment is so stifling. And what we've had is accumulation of year after year after year of regulations. And in states and in other countries where they've really tackled regulation, they've had more of a transformation and more economic growth attributable to that than virtually anything else. And so in addition to focusing on those more traditional roles of a lieutenant governor, I would love to have the lieutenant governor be the minister of deregulation.
Senator Davis, I'm blaming this on you. I introduced Freddie as Freddie Washington. He and I were talking about Freddie Boom Boom Washington from Welcome Back, Kotter. It's Freddie Allen, and I know I'm gonna pay for this. Freddie Allen for being in. So, Senator Davis, I'm blaming you on that.
Is that your fault, Glenn?
That discussion, so.
Thank you. So, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Joe. So I'm glad you brought up the issue of entrepreneurship, because that's a really big issue in the Black community. And outside of deregulation, what are your plans to help grow small businesses and the Black communities in Virginia?
So 80% of economic growth comes from small business. I started a small business. My dad actually was in the Apple business, and then he started with nothing. He used his car as collateral, and he borrowed $7,000. And he started a small business. And that is the American dream. And so fundamentally, when you're talking about helping those in the African American community and parts of Virginia where, African Americans they have all the same hopes and all the same dreams, but here's the issue. Many of the times, as I mentioned before, they don't have access to the capital. They don't have access to the resources. And so one of the things you can do is create an environment where it's more business friendly, where they have, one, better access to education that's more affordable, that they have better access to capital, and again, the thing that most has an impact on that is the overburdensome regulation. It's the layers and layers of regulation that put people at a greater disadvantage. So if you have more advantage and you have more access, then the regulatory burdens perhaps don't affect you as much. But if you don't, they affect you far worse. And one of the other issues that is really important for young people who are ambitious and have so much going for them, but the lack of access in many ways to affordable education is a huge issue. And if you consider what's happened in Virginia in the last 10 years, the cost of a college diploma has gone up 74%. 74%. How is that affordable? And part of the American dream, part of having access to other intelligent people who want to help and collaborate with you is having access to that educated community of young people who want to work together. So much of that happens in college campuses, and they come back to the community where they were born and raised and give back. And that's what's happened so many times in the Black community. So there's much that we can do, but it's really focused on education. It's focused on the regulatory climate, and also it's focused on the tax climate, because it's the tax climate that is so devastating also to small businesses. And when people want to invest in Virginia, we would like to incentivize them to invest in all parts of Virginia, especially the Black community. And when they look at North Carolina, where the business tax is 6%, which is what it is in Virginia, it's about to be 3%, and soon about to be 0. So where would you rather go? Would you rather go to North Carolina? There's an enormous number of educated young people in the Black community there who are dying for business to come there. Would you rather go there at 0 business tax or here at 6%? So it's pretty simple, in my mind.
Glenn, you want to share some of your thoughts?
Sure, and this is where, Jill and I agree on the 30,000-foot view on all this. The difference is I've got the experience. I literally started a business out of a one-bedroom apartment. I had the point where I didn't know how to make payroll. I understand that North Carolina tax rate Jill talks about. no one who's starting a small business in their health cares. Actually, they hate the fact that sometimes we're talking about those businesses and not those small businesses. You see C corporations, which are the ones that have that North Carolina tax rate that Jill says the difference is big. Well, when you start a business in your house, you're an S corporation, you're an LLC, you're a sole proprietor. Your taxes actually come through to your personal tax filing. So when we try to go and keep up with North Carolina, all it does in many cases is take away the opportunity to help those small businesses actually get built and out of people's houses. And that's why I'm running, because we can all read a book, but I've lived it, and I live it day in and day out, and I work with entrepreneurs today. When you talk about the black communities, what can we do? It starts early. First is the education in the schools, because the education is the foundation for everything. And we need to make sure that everyone has a chance for a solid foundation where they can actually springboard off of. School choice is a big thing. That's why I started a charter school in Virginia Beach that's done well, and other alternative scenarios, so no one gets left behind. We also have to make sure that schools all across Virginia have the same access to bandwidth. So many of our 21st century teaching tools are online now. And so fortunate, because the underserved areas, which happen to be larger by communities than others, those are the ones that are left out from having that bandwidth, and they don't have access to those tools. And then you take it from their level, and you say, well, if we give them that, then we're good. And well, no, you're not, because you see, sometimes you look at these communities, and there's that stigma attached. People grow up, especially in these communities, saying, you have to go to college to be something. You have to go to college to do something or to be successful. And that's not true, and we know this up here. But they don't do that when they grow up. And they say, my mom, my dad can never put me through school. I can't get a scholarship. I'm never going to be successful. We have to change that stigma. We have to go to them and say, look, you can come out of school today. If you do well in math and science and just try hard, you can get a great job at a nuclear power plant with Dominion Power. You can go work for Steel in my district working on robotics. They'll take you fresh out of high school with a well-paying job. You can start your own company. You can live that American dream, even regardless of what community you grow up in. We have to get rid of that stigma that's attached. Because if people don't have a positive attitude, they're never going to reach that full potential. And we have to make sure they have that positive attitude, that they believe in themselves. I've been there. I know what it's like to go when, Jill talks about capital, and, I'm like the 90-some% of other small businesses. There was no access to capital to me, and you can do whatever you want at the state level. There will never be. The ability, when you're going to start a business out of your house, you're not going to go to the bank, whatever you do to the credit ratings, and have them give a loan. I'm walking into a bank and saying, look, I can cover debt service. I need a loan for this. I've already got the project coming through. We've been in business for 5 years. Can I have this loan? And they said, well, where's the collateral? And I said, well, if I had the money and then the collateral, I wouldn't need your loan. And, that's the stuff we deal with. So it's not, they're never going to have access to collateral. What they need more important than anything is the ability to have that positive attitude, know how to scrape by, how to get through, and where to turn to for support. And we have to provide that support in those communities. That's the foundation. I could talk for half an hour on the rest of the stuff, but I think that's the start.
Would you support targeted programs in the African American community to spur small business growth?
Not only would I support it, we have to do it. And I've actually done this before in Virginia Beach. I was on Virginia Beach City Council. I was on the Minority Business Council, and we did outreach to those communities and helped minority communities and minority businesses not only help with getting contracts in the localities, but also become mentors for that next generation behind them, because that's where those role models come from. So I don't think it's a matter of would we support it. I think there's no option. We have to do that.
Thank you.
In lockstep regarding the conversation, in lockstep with the conversation regarding financial and budgetary initiatives, because my background in terms of this conversation with the Virginia Commonwealth is that we had the state senator Wagner here, who was running for governor, and he basically said that Ed Gillespie's numbers are bogus and out of the water, and that from the conversation it sounded like there's no room but up in terms of taxes here in Virginia. You have a Democrat who has spent out the yang over the past few years. As much as there has been Republican resistance, you do have a budgetary issue. And so what I want to find out from you all is exactly what are your top 3 budget issues, and how will you deal with them in terms of being the Lieutenant Governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia?
Okay, so the question is, I think they're in two parts. What is my assessment in terms of what perhaps Senator Wagner's view of the, do you have to jack it up or can you maintain the status quo or even reduce spending? My view is sometimes different. I have great respect for Senator Wagner. I've served with him. He is very smart and he has done an extraordinary job in advocating for tremendous amount of important work in the Commonwealth of Virginia, especially in his work on the Finance Committee. However, I have a different view from many of my colleagues in terms of where our issue is. I don't believe that we have a revenue problem. I think we have had, over time, a spending problem. And for example, I introduced legislation this year that was effectively an anti-ratcheting bill. It prevented us from consistently, year after year, growing the size and scope of government. Because I believe when you transfer resources from the private sector into government, you're actually doing an enormous disservice to our communities. I think that basically the private sector does things better than government does. And I think that that's been consistently, I don't think there's any doubt about that. If you watch, look at healthcare. When government takes over healthcare, you get poorer outcomes. I just think when there's competition, whether it's competition in education, we talked about charter schools. I also started a charter school. So my view of it is less is more. And I am the only candidate running for lieutenant governor who signed the no tax pledge. And I have kept that pledge as long as I have been in the Senate of Virginia. I have served on the Finance Committee, and I have maintained my commitment to the Commonwealth's priorities, which are, investment in K-12, being focused on higher ed, being committed to our community colleges, being committed to transportation, being committed to salary increases for our teachers, being focused on compensation for our state police, for our constitutional officers. In fact, this year, while I served on the Finance Committee, I chair the Finance Subcommittee that's in charge of all the state's technology, all of the state's employees, the court system, all of public safety. We had a $1.5 billion budget shortfall. And I didn't come back and say, you know what, I can't make my ledger work. It's just too bad. I'm going to have to come back to the Finance Committee, and the recommendation from my subcommittee is going to have to be, we got to raise taxes. In this climate, I don't know how you can, with a straight face, make that recommendation. My number one priority would be to never make that recommendation. Because again, people, families, small businesses, big businesses, they are like geese. They will migrate to where the best economic climate exists. And that's no longer Virginia. We used to be number one best place to raise a family, number one best place to start a business, best place to be an entrepreneur. We're not anymore. So my number one priority would be to get us back there. That's my number one priority. My number two budget priority would be to not raise taxes. Jacking up taxes is, in my view, the wrong way to do it. And so the bill that I introduced this year is consistent with my number three priority, which is to make strong fiscal management decisions that don't contribute to the ongoing ratcheting of government. So that in years when you have budget surpluses, rather than plowing that back into, spending that seems good, feels good, it always feels good. Let's spend more on that. That's a great new program. Great. But is it the core function of government? Is that money better left with you to start your business? It goes back to, is that money better left with you in the community so that you have access to that money to do something with it for your family or for your business? And what my bill would have done, had it passed, is it would have allowed budget surpluses to be returned to the taxpayers and to basically be used as a way to effectively buy down the tax rate. And it's a template for what's been used in other states and been done very successfully. And it's been able to actually prevent what is this effective ratcheting up, so that when you have surpluses, government gets bigger. With my bill, government wouldn't grow, but it would come back to the taxpayer, and in a sense then lower the tax rate. That's where Virginia has to be. That has to be our priority, to come back and address this issue of, rather than jacking up tax rates, do what other states are doing. Push forward with innovation and not be left behind. It's been since 1972, and I know I've talked too long, I'll close with this, but people have got to remember, we have not addressed in any meaningful way changes in our tax rates since 1972, and we wonder why other states are smoking us, because they're pushing forward with great and innovative ways to restructure taxation. Look at how the economy's changed since 1972. The highest tax bracket is $17,000, and $1972, $17,000. Great. That actually equals $99,000 in today's dollars. It doesn't make any sense.
You know, we have to make sure we have the right budget priorities, and taxes, tax reform, those are definitely areas that we have to pay attention to. But this is truly where, you know, the rubber meets the road, and it comes down to the details. You know, when we talk about, you know, the tax rate, once again, you know, the C Corp, that idea, that big corporation, this is not you and I starting a business out of a house. This is not us getting together for, you know, let's go start a firm. Those are the big companies, and the majority of them don't pay taxes in Virginia, even if they're here. They have got great, well-paid accountants. They find ways to move money around across other states, and that takes money away from other priorities we have, whether it's schools, whether it's helping small business people. You know, it's always about the details. We all hear sound bites, and they give us a warm and fuzzy. But the details is where the rubber meets the road, we get things done, and we truly help people. Right? I haven't signed a new tax pledge. I can tell you I have no intention of raising taxes. It would be wrong to do, and we can't go that route. It would make us worse. But, you know, a pledge doesn't put food on people's table. It doesn't give businesses help. You want me to sign a pledge? I'll sign a pledge that we'll be #1 again for business and job growth. There's my pledge. That requires me to go do something, not to not do something. I've always kind of been about action. As far as my priorities go when it comes to a budget, it's making sure that we prioritize the things that are most important. One is education. We have to make sure that the kids in Virginia, all kids in Virginia, have that foundation to compete in the 21st century global economy. Look, it's simple. When I graduated high school, I thought, you know, I'd be competing regionally. Maybe I'd compete on the East Coast for my job. I never thought I'd compete nationally nor globally, but that's what the kids of today are doing. We have to make sure that they're prepared and they have the right technology in the schools and the right opportunities. The second thing we need to do is invest in our infrastructure. We want to talking about raising revenue from our economic opportunities and creating those economic opportunities. You need to create an environment where businesses succeed. That means roads. That means making sure the port that we're growing on over in Hampton Roads can get those trucks all the way across down 81, so it grows businesses all the way through that corridor. And we have to make sure we continue investing in that infrastructure. And the third thing we need to do is our public safety. You see, we have turnover in a lot of employees that we have at the state. And some people can say, well, at the admin level, if you have a desk job and you're sitting there, you know, maybe at the state capitol, that, you know, if they get hired by North Carolina, so be it, or whatever, and maybe there's some truth to that, but here's the problem. You see, when it comes to our public safety people, when it comes to our police and our sheriffs, you can't be taught experience. You can't be taught street experience. You can't read a book for that. So when these people have the experience to truly be out there and train that next level coming through and know what to expect on the streets because they've done it for 5 years in that same environment, we're starting to lose them. And we can't afford that. And additionally, on top of that, we can't afford to pay people that put their lives on the line day in and day out and put them into the field where I'm worried for them, their families are worried that they may not come home that night. And what happens is they go out there and they're wondering how they're going to pay their bills, how they're going to pay their mortgage, how they're going to put food on the table, as opposed to what that guy around that corner may be doing. We have to make sure that when our people that go out there protect us are in the field, that we give them a salary that allows them to think about what's going on at that point in time, not that they can't cover what's going on at home.
I'd like to follow up on that.
Okay, let's try that again.
I'd like to follow up with you again on the priorities because the general manager of Metro just went to Capitol Hill and he stated, I know you all have given me billions of dollars, but guess what? We spent that. And we haven't done anything with it. In fact, we are still working on phase 1 of phase 1. And the metros still do not run on time, and the transportation, I don't know how many train stations you have in Virginia. I don't believe it's that many. But the federal government has given them an official answer. You need to go back to the state. And you all, the Commonwealth, have been asked to chip into providing over $250 million just to get Metro to where it was in 1979. So my question to you is this: are you going to chip in and ask these wonderful people from the Commonwealth to pay for something that really doesn't run out into your neighborhoods? Or are you going to stand up and tell the federal government and also the District of Columbia, Maryland, that you all have more stations? It's your business. It's your deal. How will you all handle that?
So not having had the opportunity to sit around the table for those discussions, the first thing I want to do is sit around those tables. You see, I've seen deals, and no deal is inherently good or bad. No ask is inherently good or bad. What is good or bad is were they negotiated in the best interest of the Commonwealth of Virginia and the taxpayers. And that's where I think we need to push a little bit more. You see, there are, like you mentioned, there are some scenarios where we should be able to go back, but we have to have an administration that goes in there and actually negotiates at the table. I've always, when I look at government, and whether it's the local level, the state level, sometimes the federal level, and they negotiate with businesses. And sometimes they're at such a disadvantage because you send sometimes a government employee in there who isn't well versed on negotiations, and the businessman walks out eating their lunch, and you never blame the business for asking, right? So that's why I think it's important that we have a business person in these offices, because they need to walk in there, they need to read through these agreements, so we don't end up negotiating a bad deal and spending more money than we need to spend of our taxpayers' dollars. Yes, we need a metro. The transportation infrastructure is the most important, one of the most important things we have. But I am not going to sit there at carte blanche and say, yes, without seeing anything, without sitting at that table, I'm going to go sign the document. I expect to be held accountable by the taxpayers. And that means I get in there myself, I read the documents, I negotiate, and then I walk out and I get held accountable.
So to answer your question, I think Virginia has to do its share, but not a penny more. And here is where we need to be aggressive advocates, and we need to be talking about investment in transportation, investment in infrastructure that actually works, that has a matrix for accountability. We talked about all these discussions back with, in 2013 when we did the big transportation bill. We talked about we're going to throw all this money, we're going to invest in transportation. But guess what? There's no meaningful investment in transportation or meaningful improvement if there isn't something like Smart Scale that didn't come until much later. If it's not just, politicians who are sitting around making decisions about, well, this seems like a great project, we really want this project. We need real metrics that work. We need to be aggressively advocating for the best deal for every project. And we need to be actually making these decisions based on where the dollars are best spent for the best result. And I would argue clearly, Northern Virginia is one of those places. Hampton Roads is one of those places. It has an enormous negative impact on the economy when people, goods, and services can't move. But here's the downside with where things have been. You're talking about this enormous waste of taxpayer dollars. Another perfect example is 460. Many people know about 460. This was a transportation project that cost $250 million. And guess what happened? We spent that money, and then somebody decided, you know what? Looking at where the best bang for our buck is going to be, it's not going to be 460. We probably need that money maybe in Northern Virginia. So they spent all that money. Never once did a shovel hit the ground, and then they decided to cancel the project. That's what we're talking about when we need real leadership. And I believe in getting things done. And I've had a lot of experience working on the finance committee. I've had a lot of experience actually starting a business with one person. And now I'm working in a business that's in all 50 states, and you work with a sharp pencil and you get things done. And you don't sit around and you don't waste people's time. We're all busy people. And I've been able to balance a whole lot in my career. But the number one thing that I have always focused on is not wasting people's time. And we have wasted so much time, so many resources, and so much taxpayer money. And so my commitment as somebody who's going to hopefully serve on a statewide ticket, hopefully serve in statewide office, would be to support strong statewide leadership in the governor's office, because clearly the lieutenant governor doesn't have the ability to go out there and influence these transportation projects. Who are we kidding? But for heaven's sake, to work with strong statewide leadership with a vision in a way that's truly transformative. We've been talking about it. We've had year after year of elected office holders who said, yeah, we're going to deliver, but we haven't done it. We've got the resources, we've got the money, but what we've lacked is the execution. So what have we done? Just like you've talked about, hemorrhaged money with not a lot to show for it. And driving here tonight, I was 15 minutes late, even though I left like an hour early, because I was parked on 395 trying to get here. And really, we have the worst transportation, second in the country almost. That's an embarrassment. Virginia can do better. And taxpayers should demand that we do better. Because heaven knows we're paying a lot of taxes.
Let's talk about healthcare for a few minutes. The Republicans just passed the latest version of their healthcare bill, and many people who have been covered under the Affordable Care Act are concerned that they may lose their healthcare now if a version of the bill also passes the Senate. What are your thoughts on that bill, and also what are your plans to control the rising cost of healthcare in Virginia?
So I've been heavily engaged in the healthcare discussion since it first started. I am a strong believer in free markets. I genuinely believe that if you would allow competition in healthcare, real competition, not government takeover, not government-run healthcare, you would see healthcare costs drop dramatically. And one of the critical things that people seem to have lost sight of is that health insurance doesn't equal access to health care. And that's the problem. And as I've had, conversations with people all over the Commonwealth of Virginia, especially in communities where they have lacked access to health care, and they desperately believed that the Affordable Care Act was going to be, the great opportunity for them to solve this problem, it's actually had the reverse impact in many, many cases. And there was a story that was relayed to me about a woman who was 55 years old, and she was paying somewhere in the $600 a month for her old insurance. She signed on to the Affordable Care Act. That was her new insurance. She was paying more. She was getting less coverage. And in this case, what she most wanted was a mammogram. And unfortunately, under the Affordable Care Act and the insurance she was provided, she was told, can't get a mammogram. That's not what this insurance is going to cover. You can get contraception, fortunately, but not a mammogram. To which she responds, I'm 55 years old. I don't need the contraception, I need the mammogram. So this is what the Affordable Care Act, this one-size-fits-all, forced down on states, mandates that are incredibly counterproductive, have done to healthcare. And it has 100% contributed to the rising cost of healthcare. So I took a very different view of this. I was on the other side of this debate. So that when the mandate was first forced on states, I introduced the legislation in Virginia that said it's against the law for the federal government to force you to enter into a contract against your will. If the federal government wants to offer services, the federal government wants to tell you that they're going to offer this healthcare option, okay. But at the end of the day, the federal government can't tax you, can't penalize you, and can't force you to buy healthcare that's worse than the healthcare you already have and costs you more money. And you know what? People said, well, that'll never pass in Virginia. And it did. I was incredibly proud. It passed in the Senate of Virginia, and it passed in the House of Virginia, and it became the legislation that was the foundation on which then Attorney General Cuccinelli used that as his platform to pursue litigation. And I would argue that many, many people back then said, no, just wait this out. The Affordable Care Act is going to prove to be, it's going to prove to be the great thing that we think it's going to be. Well, fast forward to today. And as long as there's any uncertainty at the federal level about what's going to happen, states that bought into it, given how that all played out, would ultimately have bankrupted themselves given what the economic climate is now. And before even expansion today, right now, but before expanding Medicaid, before buying into this whole thing, Medicaid right now is already 1/4 of our general fund budget. Most people actually don't realize that. So here we are having this discussion about priorities, about the issue that I have to deal with when I preside over the finance subcommittee that I chair, which is public safety, the courts, all of our state employees, all of these issues that matter to Virginians, technology. So here's the deal. We're at 1/4 of your general fund budget. If you expand it, if you buy into all of this, where's that money going to come from? Is that coming from higher education? Is that coming from K-12? Is that coming from transportation? So I would argue that this is probably one of the most critical decisions that states had to make then. It's going to be a really critical decision for Congress now, and it has the potential to really have a devastating impact on states and their budgets.
So would you have supported the current Republican bill that's in the Senate now? Would you have voted for it?
Well, so here's the deal. I support, here's what I believe. I believe that any reform is better. We have to have reform. And reform of the current Affordable Care Act is critical because people are losing access to health care and they can't afford the health care and they're being taxed when they're not buying in. So it's a far worse healthcare climate than we were when we started, period. So I don't know what the Senate's going to do to the bill, but I can tell you that we absolutely, desperately need to reform the Affordable Care Act, period.
So is that?
So I'm in favor, yes, I am in favor of reform, 100%.
Well, were you in favor of the House bill? Would you have voted for it?
I would have supported the House bill. I mean, I feel like you have to do something to reform the Affordable Care Act as it is now.
Glenn?
So I'll start with that and move myself forward. So I would have as well. I would have supported that bill because the Affordable Care Act, as it was falling apart, and it had problems. I really do think it's going to go down as one of the worst policies in our nation for a number of reasons we won't get into. But just the financial stability, you can't put a policy in place and change it as quickly as President Obama did, as much as he did, and expect that it's financially balanced. I'm a nuts and bolts guy. I'm a dollars and cents guy. I work at the detail level. And so that was my concern with this thing all along. So I would have supported this as well, so we can try to get something that is sustainable, and we'll see what the Senate does with it. With regards to Virginia healthcare, you know, Medicaid expansion was something that hit us when I first walked in 2014. And I had the opportunity since 2014 to vote against expanding Medicaid 6 times, either voting against expanding it or stopping the governor from doing it unilaterally while we were out of session. But here's what I also understood. Medicaid is almost 25% of our budget. It used to be in 2006 that it cost a little over $4 billion a year of our budget. Now it's over $8 billion a year. In 2006, it was about 875 people in Medicaid. Now it's over 1.4 million people in Medicaid. It's unsustainable, and you can't put your head in the sand. You see, that year in 2014, I got upset. We talk about being Republicans. I got upset that we were told we're the party of no. We just say no to everything. And we can't just do that. That's not how we grow a big tent. That's not how we bring people in. And that's not how you solve problems. If you want to say no, in some cases we should, as with expanding Medicaid, you need to have a solution because it doesn't stop the problem from getting bigger. So I looked at it and said we have to do something. And what I saw when I went and dove into the Medicaid system was that it is a hostage system. If someone is in the system and they make $1 too much than the allowable limit, they lose all their benefits. So they can't take the $1 an hour raise, they can't take the promotion at work, they can't better their life and that of their families. And you wonder why Medicaid is growing at such an astronomical rate? It's because we keep putting people in a system and not helping them get off the system. And that's what I want to fix. So in 2014, I put a bill in that would have done that. It would have gotten rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. It would have put in some work requirements and looking for work requirements and some community service stuff. And it would help people get off of an entitlement system that better their life and the life of their families. But it didn't go anywhere, and I'm getting killed for it right now in this campaign how dare I put in a bill that actually solves a problem. But I'll tell you something, I am not the guy to put my head in the sand. I'm the guy to go out there and solve a problem, and I'll tell you that bill that I put in 2014 with Tom Russ, had we done it, Virginia would be better off today than where it was and where it is today, and would be poised to be better on the backside of whatever the federal government does. And that's how I operate. So we can all say what we don't want to do, but at the end of the day, if there's a problem, we can tell you what we don't want to do, but you still have to find a solution.
You know, most of these members haven't even read the reform bill for Obamacare. You both said you'd vote for it and you would support it. Have you either of you read the bill to know what the details inside of it are and what the downfield implications might be?
So I was with Rob Whitman earlier today going through this, because you're 100% right. You know, you can't be for or against something unless you know the details. And so I had just kind of a fluke today. I was on the way up, and I was at an event with Rob Whitman, and he pulled some people into a room for about an hour or so, and we went through the details. And it is, you know, nothing's ever perfect, right? The Senate's going to get a hold of it. Who knows what the Senate does with it? But it starts fixing some things. You know, when you talk about the underserved population, and those are the poorest, they couldn't afford health insurance anyway. And then you go out there and you say, well, now you have to buy health insurance, or else we're going to penalize you. And you're like, well, they couldn't afford it, and if you penalize them, that doesn't mean you give more money. And then those that you actually get to buy into it, and they realize I had health insurance, but then they realize the deductible is so high that unless they get hit by a car, it really doesn't help them. You know, that's the problems that we were facing. So when we got rid of that requirement, you know, with this new bill, that went away. The additional one was the employer mandate. You know, the hired employee today is a lot more costly than what has ever been in the past, with HR issues and requirements, with benefits and, you know, with the health care that had to be provided. We want to grow jobs, but at the same time, it seems the federal government kept saying, but every employee you hire, we're going to make it more costly in the benefits. So with this new bill, it rolls that back. And once again, companies can decide whether or not to offer health insurance. If they don't have the money, they can't be forced to, but they can still hire. And what we all believe is that the market will make it, as it had before, that most employers will probably still offer it because that's what you have to do to be competitive for the best workers.
So I'm glad you asked that question, because it's real hypocrisy when people on the other side said, well, Nancy Pelosi said, she didn't know what was in there, she'd read it after it passed. So we have to own that too. And I am very familiar with the legislation because I happen to be running statewide, and this is a really big deal. Healthcare is among the biggest discussions that we're going to have in this campaign, and probably we're going to have this year, just because of the massive cost to this economy. So you can't be engaged in this discussion about what you're going to do in Virginia, and granted, again, the lieutenant governor doesn't have a lot to say about healthcare, but if we're talking about the economy, you got to be talking about health policy. So you're right to ask that question. I am very familiar with the bill. I am not, I gotta be honest, I'm not in love with every part of that bill, but I'm such a strong advocate for reform of the Affordable Care Act that I believe it is incumbent upon us, if we're gonna, talk the talk, then you gotta walk the walk. So I might have preferred some very different features in that bill, but if I had to cast the up or down vote, my vote would have been a yes. Now, I have concerns about pre-existing condition. As a legislator who fought for a lot of issues in the legislature that always haven't been popular among Republicans. I don't always vote with Republicans in the legislature. In fact, a lot of times I break with my caucus and I have on issue after issue. One of those was on the subject of, again, it was fighting insurance companies on an issue of autism coverage. It was an issue where I believe that health insurers ought to cover issues related to autism. It's a biomedical issue for children. They have GI issues. There are all kinds of things that ought to be covered by the health insurance company. And they fought me year after year after year. And I came back year after year after year. And so that issue is something that really sticks in my craw as something that's in this bill, because I don't think it, adequately addresses the pre-existing condition. So there are things that I think are absolutely imperfect. But when you have to, sometimes you got to make the call. And it's up or down, and I would be up.
Thank you both for answering.
Want to address in terms of the energy situation here in Virginia. And the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, signed an executive order making certain that oil exploration would be a very key and prominent thing to do. But there's been a tremendous backlash here in Virginia. And the last time I looked, you all got a lot of oil on the coast here and that you're not really exploring. And I want to know your opinion. Is this a climate change issue for Virginia, or have you all as Republicans gone completely to the left here and you're against oil and you're against coal? And tell me where you are when it comes to energy.
So I have an energy background. I mentioned I was Deputy General Counsel at the Department of Energy, and it was at a time when the energy environment was really, it was a challenge, it was a hot topic, there were rolling blackouts, we were talking about energy policy and really what this country was going to do to create a more diverse energy environment, more options for us. And I think that's really critical. And I think Virginia, in order to be competitive, has to adopt a comprehensive energy policy. And again, I haven't always been on the same side with my Republican colleagues on some of these issues, but my view is as long as it can be done safely, as long as we are not creating public health risks, we should push forward. And on the subject of offshore drilling, you just raised that issue. We're talking about real budget issues that we have. If we were to explore our offshore drilling capacity, we're talking about, 4.7 billion barrels of crude on the continental shelf that's available to us offshore. We're talking about something along the lines of 31 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. That's clean burning natural gas. And if we're able to enter into some kind of agreement where we get a split, that would pay for our transportation for probably the rest of my life. So, maybe not the rest of my life, but let's be realistic. So, we're being really short-sighted if we're not, one, talking about a comprehensive energy policy, and that includes all forms of energy. We're talking about wind and solar. It includes natural gas, which is clean burning. But it also means that as long as it can be done safely, that we need to be talking about offshore energy exploration. Absolutely.
So, those are all the facts, regarding energy, and they're important. And yes, we need to be exploring all opportunities for energy. And I've probably taken more votes than anyone in the General Assembly on when it comes to offshore drilling. When I was on City Council, we had a number of votes we had to take on this for support of different things. And it got to be important because the tourism industry had gotten kind of up in arms over this because of the safety of it can be done. And I sat down with a lot of those in the tourism industry. The military, this was a big issue for them for quite some time as well because they have a lot of areas out there off the coast that they do their training, and they were concerned about offshore drilling and even windmills actually for a while. And we had to sit down with them and work things out. Things can be good or bad, but at the end of the day, if things are good, you still have to be able to work with stakeholders to get them in place and make sure everyone's happy and you don't alienate anyone, and you also don't drive jobs and opportunities away when you bring something in. And that's the background I have, especially on energy, because I've sat at that table. I know the details. I know the challenges. I've had to have those discussions so we can get everyone to agree that, yes, we can do this, and here's how we can do it, and we can all work together. And then we also have to look out in the future. You see right now, yes, let's use oil, let's use natural gas, but there's always stuff coming around the corner. You talk about solar, and right now in Virginia, solar isn't cost effective. It is in some other states because the cost of a kilowatt hour up there is much higher than it is down here. But technology always gets better. Solar panels right now are very inefficient. But what's interesting? Up at MIT, they're doing research right now to replace silicon in computer electronic chips and solar panels with powdered coal. You see, powdered coal it takes 7 layers of silicon that have the same sunlight absorption and energy transference as 1 layer of powdered coal. So it may be coal that makes solar panels economically viable as we move forward. How ironic is that? And not only does it allow us to go forward with solar, but it also starts to revitalize the coal industry out in Southwest Virginia. You see, if we're going to talk about things, I don't want to just talk about them in 2016 facts. I don't want to talk to them 2017 facts. I want to look at what's 2020, what's 2025, what's 2030. Let's plan for the future, because when we make Virginia number one again for business and job growth and entrepreneurism and families and all that stuff, let's make we do it in a way that doesn't just make it number one again for a point in time, but sustainable for years to come for that next generation.
Thanks so much, Glenn. We only have a few minutes left for this conversation. I want to thank you, Glenn, and you, Jill, for joining us here today. But before we end, I just wanted to get some of your thoughts about HBCUs, or historically black colleges and universities. You have a handful of HBCUs in Virginia, and I wanted to know what you were willing to do to make sure that HBCUs not only survive in the future but also thrive, and if you're also wanting to make sure that funding for HBCUs is increased in Virginia. We'll start with you, Glenn.
Sure, definitely. It's a jewel of the state. I have Hampton out in my neck of the woods, and it's amazing. When you look at some of the opportunities that exist, not just educational-wise, but as role models, that really is where the true opportunity comes. We don't do a great job in Virginia with PR, with advertising, with marketing, and we need to do better, whether it's this issue or whether it's, honestly, cybersecurity. We're pretty bad in a number of aspects. So we got to do better when it comes to marketing those tools that we have. But we also have to do better when it comes to utilizing our assets. And we started out this conversation by talking about education for the next generation and what we can do to help them, entrepreneurism on education. And the biggest thing we could do is find role models and bring them to them at that early age when they're best influenced. And there's no better place to go than those universities to find them. So I think not only do we need to make sure they get funding necessary to continue to grow and thrive, market them better that they exist, but also bring them more into the fold to help solve some of the problems that we have in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
I would just say, I alluded to this earlier. Access to higher education is really, really important. Access to an affordable higher education is really important. But I think our tradition of having black colleges and universities in the Commonwealth of Virginia is also very important, because I think that is a tradition that is is special, and it is something that, just to echo what Glenn said, I think it is of high value, and it does create an opportunity for extraordinary role models, and to also bring together a community that will then go back into its own community, one would hope, and bring investment and something special back into the Black community by keeping that tradition together.
Thank you. And would you support increasing funding for HBCUs in Virginia as Lieutenant Governor?
Yes, absolutely I would. And I spend, again, I mentioned before, a lot of time on the Finance Committee, and that delicate balance and that question of allocation of resources is always a challenge. But we have actually spent a lot of time focusing priorities on higher education, and I would argue that we could do better by actually turning that fire hose a little more with a little perhaps more focus on specialized colleges and universities, those that preserve unique and special traditions, those that bring something unique to higher education, and I would argue that is exactly what those colleges and universities do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. My final question for the evening, and I want to thank you all so much for coming out tonight and talking with us. But there are a lot of single mothers out there, and they have listened to all the promises from both sides of the party that whatever changes were going to be implemented, that they would work out better for them. And as we go into Mother's Day coming up, you still have a lot of African American mothers, especially in Petersburg and other areas, Richmond, and so on, who are struggling financially. They've turned to the government, and they're still struggling. What message do you want to give those individuals? Is it a message that says the GOP is coming on the white horse and we're going to save the day? Or is it a message that says you all are going to have to pull up your boots and you have to walk yourself? What exactly is the message you want to give single mothers in this particular week?
Well, I would just say this is a message, I hope, that transcends any racial boundaries. There are young women, there are working women that our party has not reached. And it's not just African American women or Latino women that we don't do a good job communicating with and that don't feel that we're very relatable as a party. But it's women in general, I'll be honest. And so as a Republican woman who has traveled the Commonwealth of Virginia trying to talk about the things that we believe as a party, the things that we believe that government isn't always the answer, that there's so much that we can do in our communities, but so many good ways the government can work that can incentivize investment, that can incentivize good behavior, that can help women who are heads of households. I mean, let's be realistic. Think how many women are heads of households today. And women have an unusual and often really difficult task to balance the demands of their career, the demands of raising their children. Many of them don't have a career. They're not fortunate enough to have a job at all. But what they have to do is find a way to provide for their family, whatever it takes. And so we have to be thinking, beyond the sort of rhetoric that we're often spewing out there. And the thing that I believe where we have failed is it's not enough to go and talk to women in minority communities every 4 years in October. But we need to be in those communities all the time. And as a constituent service matter, I have been committed every single day that I have been in the state senate to be in the community and to be solving problems. And you can't speak in platitudes, and government isn't always the answer. But it's working in the community, working with nonprofits, working with businesses, working to attract investment in the community, and then helping that community investment pair up with the people where there's a need. And there was a perfect example. We had a tremendous number of people who didn't have a job, didn't have access to jobs in the valley where I represent. And yet, we had businesses that were desperate for workers. They needed people with CDLs. They needed people who could work, in food service. But for whatever reason, they didn't match up. They didn't have the skills. The labor force was there, but they didn't have the skills that these businesses needed. And so one of the things we did, and this is just solving a problem. This isn't government coming in and giving anybody anything. This was solving a problem. We sat down with the community college, and we had some of those businesses say, we'll actually help you design a curriculum. We'll create some access to that curriculum. We're going to graduate some people, and here are some really amazing high-paying jobs. And we solved some problems for young women who were really struggling, who didn't have access really to education at all. Many of them are women I've worked with. They were single mothers, didn't have any dad anywhere in the picture. They were struggling. And what we were able to do was really extraordinary. And that's a template for something that you can create or repeat all across the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so those are the kinds of things that I think we can be talking about in our party. Those are real things that we really do. And that we work with, being advocates for a stronger economy, for more investment in our communities. Me, as somebody who's working for healthcare and women's health, if you don't have healthcare, you don't have a whole lot. If you're not healthy, you can't work. So I would argue that we have a lot to contribute. And as a female, when there are not a lot of women, historically there have not been a lot of women in elected office, we can be role models and we can encourage women to be involved and be a part of what is empowering women and help be a part of the solution and not just feel like they're somehow on the short end and being victims of a community that doesn't care. And so that would be my message, and a very, very happy Mother's Day to moms all across the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Well, my message would be that there's a real conversation coming. The answers to problems like this, they're not easy, they're not simple, they don't come overnight. They're complicated, and they're not all the same all around the Commonwealth. You see a single mother with 2 kids that works multiple jobs, that happens to be black in some parts of the state, has a much greater chance of their child potentially ending up in a gang than a single mother who may be white over in another part of the state. Round peg, square hole problems is the issue we have in Richmond. We think certain areas are just like other areas, and it's not true. But we need to address this, and there needs to be a conversation coming because we have to help. And it starts with reaching out and providing the support. I was a legislative aide to Governor Bob McDonnell when the Welfare Reform Initiative came about by George Allen, bipartisan initiative. And what George Allen actually did to help out was he increased the availability for bus passes, for transportation, for those to get off welfare. He increased credits for daycare. He did things that actually increased opportunities and government programs to those that needed it so they can work themselves off of welfare, and it worked. You see, that's what we have to be willing to do again, is sit down at the table and say, what are the problems in this community and that community, and not think everyone's the same, and then approach it. And the message would be that that's the conversation that's coming. And it's one that we have to have. Because if we're going to thrive again, if we're going to let everyone to reach their true economic opportunity, it means it's whether you have 2 parents at the house, 1 parent at the house, whether you happen to be black or white or Hispanic or any other ethnicity, whether you live on the western side of the state or the eastern side of the state. And we can do that. My wife kind of jokes and somewhat serious and jokes that I'm a problem solver. I'm the guy that I get excited, that I get energy being faced with a challenge and going down the rabbit hole to find solutions and find ways to implement them. And this is what we need to be able to do. And this is what we should do here. And as Jill said, I'd love to echo that everyone has a very, very happy Mother's Day and enjoys it with a wonderful family.
Thanks, Glenn. We want to give each of the candidates an opportunity to make a closing statement. And in that statement, can you talk about the importance of voting and getting out the vote? Why don't you start, Joe? Thank you.
Yes, I would just say you can't be distressed about what the issues are in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and you can't be disappointed by leadership if you don't participate. So I would beg everybody, we are all stakeholders in this. I am as a mom, I am as somebody who runs a business, as somebody who looks to the future for what Virginia can be. We all have a say. And this is an important election in Virginia. We've had 4 years of what I would consider stagnation, a little bit of benign neglect, a whole lot of turmoil, and I would love to see us have transformative statewide leadership with a vision for what Virginia can be, and something that's different for every community in the Commonwealth of Virginia to have an opportunity to succeed, so that we're not plummeting in national rankings for our economic growth, our economic development, our opportunities for education. So I can speak to that, and I can tell you that elections are tragically low turnout in Virginia in off years, and it's so disappointing. We do all this work and we spend all this time going around the Commonwealth of Virginia, and we need people to turn out and to vote. So that's number one. Number two, I would just say in closing, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation. It means a lot to me personally that you all would invest the time, that you would spend the time to plan this, and let us come and talk about who we are and what it is that we believe and what our backgrounds are. Because, I think we have extraordinary people running, and I have had a wonderful time being on the trail for the last year with my colleagues in this race. And I think Virginia will do well with any Republican who's running right now. It would be far better to have some of these smart people who would be out there advocating for Virginia. I hope that people who are watching this debate and people who are in this room would consider me as your lieutenant governor candidate. I am incredibly committed, and I'm committed on all of the issues that we talked about. But you've heard about those issues. The one thing that I want to leave you with is this, and this is really important, and I've said this over and over in every forum, in every debate, and I'm going to say it here too. And that is, we've not won a statewide election for Republicans, for people who are fiscally conservative, for people who care about the vision that we share. We've not won since 2009 in a statewide election. This is our shot, and we don't have to give up. And here's the issue, though. If we focus only on talking to Republicans, talking to each other, same store sales, the same people that we always talk to, we will never win another statewide election in Virginia. So my goal in this primary election has been not to only talk to Republicans, but to talk to everybody else. And I've spent a lot of time in Northern Virginia and in Central Virginia talking to folks in the Indian American community, and in the Latino community, and in the African American community, and trying desperately to get them to understand that the messages that they have heard from the left are not true. And if we go there and we tell them what it is that we believe, what it is that we believe on the economy, what it is that we believe about, women's rights, and the rights of young people to have access to a higher education. Women's rights are economic freedom rights. Women's rights are Second Amendment rights. So when people say, well, the Republican Party is not right for women, the Republican Party is not friendly to African Americans, I say, phooey, that is not true. But there's nobody there to tell our story. And guess what? If there's nobody to tell our story, we'll never win. So that's what I would just encourage all of the folks who are participating in our primary, who are out there campaigning for Republicans, to go tell our story. But not to the people who already know it. Go tell our story to the people who don't. And I had an extraordinary opportunity to go to an event where it was all Pakistani women, and they were very skeptical. And they said, how is it possible that somebody who's as nice as you are could be a Republican? And I didn't really know how to answer that question. I was like, well, thanks, I think. But by the time we were finished, they were willing to set aside all of the notions that they had about what it was a Republican was. And once they heard from me, who was a mom, who had all the same issues that they had, who cares about all the same things they care about, they were fine. They were all in. They're willing to work to support me. And they might not like all the other Republicans they know, but in closing, that's what I want to leave you with. That is where we can do better. And that's the only way we will win. And thank you again for having me. Good night.
Well, voting is the most important opportunity, and I would say obligation we have, I think, in this country. We have a lot of challenges, and we've been talking about them a lot at the state level. But the way to get your voice heard is at the voting box. We need people to do that. And that truly is how you make a difference. So I would ask that anyone that is sitting there watching this or in the audience, June 13th is the primary, the Republican primary and the Democratic primary. So first and foremost, please go out there and cast your vote and have your voice heard. But also, don't just look at and say, I've always looked at voting Democrat or I've always voted Republican, and say, I'm just going to always do that. Say, now, if you voted Republican, please always come back to the Republican side. But don't just base it on the party platform that you've always thought you kind of followed in the past. Because you see, we've got a problem in Washington. It's called gridlock, and nothing's being done. We need people that are going to have solutions. We talked about it before. There's so much rhetoric going around. Promises being made. Sometimes people don't intend on keeping them. Sometimes they intend and they realize that they can't do it and it's too heavy of a lift. But then you have entrepreneurs and business people. And I'll tell you something, I'm running to make Virginia number one again for business and job growth. And not just for Northern Virginia, or not just for Hampton Roads, or not just for Richmond, but all around the Commonwealth. And if we're number 10 when I'm done, I failed. If we're number 5 when I'm done, I failed. If we're number 2 when I'm done, I failed. I expect to be measured of us getting back to number 1 again. And you do that by going around the Commonwealth and finding economic opportunities for everyone. So please go to the polls and do spread our message. You see, our Republican Party does have the right message. It's economic opportunity. That's what we talk about. That is a true equalizer. That is a level playing field. We just have to sometimes practice it a little bit better. And that's what I'm going to bring to the table. You know, up here we heard a couple of things. We talked about energy, and it was said that, you know, well, that's, as a lieutenant governor, you can't have too much impact on that. And transportation, we can't have too much impact on individual transportation projects. And I'll tell you, historically, that has been true. But I've been told I can't more times in my life than I can count. I wasn't supposed to start a business out of a one-bedroom apartment. I wasn't supposed to acquire a publicly traded company and take it back private. I wasn't supposed to be a 28-year incumbent for a city council seat. But I believed in myself because that's the way I was raised and that's the way I was taught, that it didn't matter what I had. It mattered what I was willing to do. And that's what you're going to have as your next lieutenant governor. Everything we talked about here, there are big problems facing the Commonwealth, and there are big problems facing individuals all across the Commonwealth. And I'm going to go attack each and every one of them by working with individuals to make sure we find a solution so everyone in the Commonwealth can reach their true potential. Thank you again for having us this evening. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for joining us.
Glenn and Jill, thank you guys for spending this time with us, and I really appreciate you all taking out all this time. Ken and Freddie Washington, Freddie Boom Boom Washington, Allen. I cannot believe I did that. And we're going to take a couple of pictures and then we'll close it down. And thanks again for everyone for coming.